Welcome to this wānanga. Tūturu is a space to hold robust and enlightening discourse, an in-depth, unapologetic and unforgiving wānanga, bringing together experts. Very rarely do we get the opportunity to have a proper wānanga about colonisation.
If we look at a lot of what we have, it's never come from the government saying, oh, you know what, that's a really good idea, like this is our idea to help te iwi Māori. That's not how any of it happened, whether it's kohanga reo, whether it's kura kaupapa. That's a direct result of the Māori protest movement.
In today's wānanga, we have a look at Māori resistance movements. Māori have been showing resistance since the arrival of Pākehā in this country. They've taken many forms, but ultimately all represent a stand for justice for what has been taken or lost. Today's guests are veteran resistance movement organiser and activist Hilda Harawira, Indigenous and environmental advocates Bianca Ranson and Te Otāne Huata, a kura kaupapa Māori raukura and Member of Parliament Hana-Rawhiti Maipi. When we think of Māori movements, we often think of a hikoi or an occupation. Resistance movements go back well before that. There is the Kīngitanga movement, the Kotahitanga movement, Māori Parliament, Parihaka, Maunga Pōhatu, and more recent hikoi and activations. However, they all have a common goal.
People may think a resistance movement is a big, large movement of the people. A resistance movement to me is a minimum of two people on a kaupapa. Reminds me of a time where my mum, who was part of the core group of Ngā Tamatua, says that they went around on a bus, with 12 people. And many people will say that they are part of Ngā Tamatua, but it was those ones that kept the ahika alive. And so a resistance movement to me is basically trying to uphold our right to be who we want to be, express what we want to express in terms of our reo, our identity, our tuakiri tangata. So that's a resistance movement to me.
Tautoko.
Resistance movements all have a way of emboldening us, giving us bravery to stand in solidarity, stand united alongside others.
E au I te kura, I tai mai te rōpū o Ngā Tamatua, Hana, Rauko, Sid, Jackson, and e mea ana kia mātou. It's okay to be Māori, pretty much. And I taua wā, horekau he tino whakaaro, he aha tēnei mea te Māori, we were just kids. Like for me personally, I found myself through the Polynesian Club. I didn't really have any kind of identity until, you know, you get some local kids saying, in the next neighbourhood saying, what are you doing here, you black bitch? And so when Sid and Hana came and they said things like, it's okay to be Māori, and they dressed up and they had photographs of themselves, and kākahu Māori was really rerekē. So kiau e timatanga tērā mōku was that identity.
As you can probably tell, Hilda is an OG when it comes to being a part of these movements. She was even around when it wasn't popular to be a part of a movement.
Yeah, I think resistance is not always protesting, it's embracing and edifying yourself. Resistance is when you buck the status quo and say, well, actually, yeah, kia ora, pai te reo Māori Pākehā. I like English, but he pai ake mōku te mōhi o taku reo. Wai hoki reira.
I think it's important that we understand what we're actually resisting against. So at one point in time, we would have been resisting against land sales, actually the ethnic cleansing of Māori. We resisted then because we obviously didn't want our land taken, because our land, as we pointed out in he whakaputanga, there was mana in the whenua. Our mana resided within the whenua. I think as we look at where we have moved to, it's a lot less blatant, a lot less explicit, but no less we still have a reason to resist from. So they want us it's at one point in time for us literally to die. At another point in time, it's assimilation, for us to be co-opted into their way of life. And so when we look at the difference, everything back then was quite explicit. To now, it's microaggressions. And so it would be, oh, we don't like the look of, by getting your moko kauai, you look less beautiful, you look so much beautiful without it. Those sort of comments. And so it is about us, about them pushing us into a mould where we just cookie cutters or just replicants of what they are. And resistance to me looks like saying, well, how about not? How about we've got a very unique culture that's only applicable or only visible in this part of the world, or actually across the world, and we want to embrace that as fully and as full-chestedly as we can.
I feel like the values of Māori movements actually are still the same. It's just a different movement for a different time and a different era, such as the Kīngitanga movement. The sole purpose of that movement was hei papuru I te whenua, hei puru I te toto, hei papuru I te mana Māori motuake. But every movement has those values. It's just resisting that same ngangara of colonisation in a different generation.
A resistance movement is an expression of our responsibility, it's an expression of our aroha, it's an expression of our commitment to everything that our tūpuna secured for us. A resistance movement is people coming together as an expression of mana. It's our right, and it's our past and it's our future. And I think in the times that we're facing currently, we need to really also make sure that we understand the urgency of an effective resistance here in Aotearoa. Resistance comes from injustice, it comes from settler colonial violence, it comes from the continuation of the oppression of our people. And and so I guess for me, resistance is our way of achieving tino rangatiratanga here in Aotearoa, and that means that we are resisting completely and wholeheartedly with everything that we have, and collectively to make sure that we don't have a continuation of generations that have to continue the same fight. And the answers have always been with us. And our ancestors knew that, and that's why they made it extremely clear that that was the future that they secured for us. And so what we need to do is we need to step into that, and we need to make sure that we are carrying that forward without fear.
And so these are the same fights with a different mask on, a different label. But at the end of the day, we resist because we want to provide a better space for our tamariki to just live full and meaningful lives.
Māori have used many forms of resistance over the years. This continues, and it changes with every generation.
The Kīngitanga came about because of losing land, ho-ho movement, the kotaitanga movement, which then formed the basis of the creation of ngā tamatoa. And then we're continuing and we're continuing. There are levels, or there's a spectrum to resistance, in that you could be resisting by speaking te reo Māori, because they don't want us to speak that. You could be resisting by putting your tamariki into kura kaupapa, resisting by having your own mara, which is about kai sovereignty and actually not the reliance on a capitalistic structure that determines what the prices are for us. But I think as well, resistance is education. So resistance for us is recognising that we don't need to be subservient to a Christian God. That our whakapapa tells us, our whakapapa literally tells us, we are gods. And I know that not everyone prescribes that whakaaro, but I can detail my whakapapa directly to io matua kore. And so it makes me no different to io matua kore, that within me exists io. So I think it's one part of it is that it is the big protests, it is the submissions, it is the petitions, but also part of it is just being who we want to be. So as Kingi Tuheitia did say, he talked about us the biggest resistance is just being ourselves, I don't think that there's anything more true, and that us being ourselves is a threat to the status quo. Our existence is a threat to this colonial structure.
I feel like I'm quite privileged. I'm a privileged Māori. I can say that out loud because the neighbours next door in Rahui Pōkeka may not have, we still live in the same hometown, same community, but they weren't privileged. They didn't have that access, to kura, to clothes, to kai, and I feel obligated to make sure that I'm speaking up for them so that they can share what I have. And that's a sacrifice, but that's all good for me. I'd rather do that than be quiet about it. Yeah.
One of the biggest successes that have come out of resistance movements has been the revitalisation of the language. It's hard to imagine a world prior to kohanga reo and kura kaupapa. It's hard to imagine a world where te reo Māori and te ao Māori were not cool things to be a part of.
Te reo Māori movement was something that was a groundswell, that within a few years people were so committed to regain te reo Māori with their mokopuna. Over 800 kohanga reo started, and people weren't paid, but that was their commitment. And
Kia ora.
and the other commitment was that you had to learn it yourself. You can't actually talk about, ka uki te reo and ka reko I kōrero te reo Māori. So that was one of the biggest, I think, well, we call it the grassroots kumara vine movement, but that was by regular people. They right across the motu who just made it happen. When Māori feel threatened, they will get up and they will mobilise. So movements are about actually the people being so highly incensed about something, like you say, injustice, that no one's going to do it for us. We've got to do it ourselves.
Just while we have a bit of a break here in the kōrero, currently sitting around the table are 3 generations of whānau who have been directly involved in many resistance movements across the country. And as we can see, the fight and the passion live on in the new generations. But in the early days, it was really radical even among Māori to stand up and have your voice heard.
I was part of Ngā Tamatua as a school kid, and the great stuff that was done in that time, and I can remember being so enthused about their articulateness. There was no Māori speaking out in the public space. And I can recall someone saying people just talked on their marae and they discussed theirs. But Ngā Tamatua made the difference because there was a vacant space. And they took it and they started talking about te reo. They started saying, well, actually, Māori affairs, we should have a Māori running it. And that was one of the first protests I went to, where they were standing outside Māori affairs saying, why did this guy get hired to be the manager of Māori affairs when you got all these other candidates, tahirua toru whā. And so they started saying things in that vacant space, and they were so articulate. Your mum, your grandparents, well, your dad wasn't part of Tamatua, but he was, I was just so proud to be sitting with you. So they were all very articulate and saying things that sort of you got straight away that nobody else said on your behalf. And it was also, this is what we can be doing. We want a control of Māori things by Māori. They were saying that back in 72. And it hasn't changed. I always remember Sir Jackson saying things like, you need to have discipline, you need to have courage. For part of, my resistance, I talk about having really good personal tikanga for myself. I can live with my own conscience. When we started our kohanga and our kura, we were so looking around for someone else to be, the starters of something. And then also being sick of just throwing from the sidelines our dislike, our complaints, and, you know, that we just actually had to start up the alternative. It's not good enough to just criticise, you know, like, because we were doing it for ages. No Māori board members, no this, no reo Māori, no, teachers with low expectations. And so in the end, when our whānau got together in Awanui to talk about, let's set up, a kura Māori, we didn't even know what it looked like. So we did 2 lists. And we had a list of what we didn't want, and that was really long. And then the list of what we wanted. We didn't even know, when you talk about dreaming, sometimes we don't know what it even looks like, but we were, we wanted te reo Māori, reo te kāinga, that our tamariki felt safe and they, they got to learn well, that they had good kaiako, all that sort of stuff. So our list was like this. And, 31 years later, I'm just glad we we had the courage to start that amongst other. And so, for me, part of resistance is creating the alternative, but also making stuff happen, like that in our space that's may not even, like I can just see that you guys are going to create so many other, new forums, new aharaini, new actions in the future.
He nui ngā hua, ka puta mai. Thank God that heroes like Whai Hilda decided to go and take the initiative for kura kaupapa and kohanga. Otherwise, hey, kaori kua tino whai mātou, o mātou whakareanga i ngā hua, i whawhai. And I think if they hadn't have made that courageous step, I wouldn't be living in the world that I'm living in today. Another point to kia ngā hua, while unfortunately this is just how I believe sometimes, when we have a common enemy, it informs us on the different education that we should be understanding, such as all my friends, not all of them, but most of my generation's like, you know what, I had no idea what Te Tiriti was about if we hadn't had this protest. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. Or I had no idea about voting. I had no idea about Te Pāti Māori. When we're raising these issues, it doesn't just backfire to the dog whistling of different governments, but it also whistles to our people like, hey, kia rite mai tātou ki nei momo mahi, kei mua i te aroaro. So, yeah.
Well, I feel like I particularly, want to acknowledge Whai Hilda and Hone and all of those that have been part of the Māori protest movement for decades and decades. And if we look at a lot of what we have, it has come from that. It's never come from the government saying, oh, you know what, that's a really good idea. Like, this is our idea to help te iwi Māori. That's not how any of it happened, whether it's kohanga reo or whether it's kura kaupapa. Even the mahi around nuclear-free and independent Pacific, if it was about the fiscal envelope and the occupations that were sparked, and all of the things that you and others have been a part of, that's a direct result of resistance. It's been a direct result of the Māori protest movement. It is a clear example to us of the power of our people coming together for resisting. Māori television, I think, is another example, that's another thing that's come out of the Māori protest movement. So there's so many examples, and I think when I look at our rangatahi and I see how beautiful their reo is and these opportunities which are nowhere near what our people deserve, but the opportunities that are available now have come out of the fight, have come out of the struggle, have come out of people dedicating a huge amount of time with their own whānau of their lives, and also the struggles that come with that from the public, from the media, from our own people, has really taken a toll in many ways. But has that been worth it? Absolutely.
So I just want to flip it and say, what does it look like if they didn't? To me, inaction is complicity in enforcing the status quo. What would it have looked like if we didn't have those instances where we fought and we came together and we rose up? How many of our tamariki would be speaking te reo Māori now? And that's a That's a terrifying thought. That's a terrifying thought. And I use that as an example because we probably take advantage of it nowadays when we see these hua, when we see our tamariki being raised, te reo Māori being their first reo now. But back then, that was never the case. Those tamariki were beaten. I mean, we owe this to the people who didn't sit on the fence, who didn't just accept being furniture in the status quo. They said, nah, we've got a vision that's going to be better for our people. Yeah, we wouldn't be here. I firmly believe we wouldn't be here without those that carved the path for us today.
These acts of resistance aren't things of the past. They're still happening as we speak. Highlighted recently with governments who send clear attacks on our people and our rights here on this whenua.
I think that there's lots of different things that motivate us to be a part of the resistance or to be a part of different kaupapa, but it really comes down to when I look at my own whānau, you know, just looking at how many of our people are hurting, how many people of our people are suffering, you know, how many of our people don't have a home, they don't have kai, they, you know, don't have whenua to build on. And this deep sense of injustice and also a real feeling that has just been inside of me for forever of, I'm not sure if anger's the right word for it, it possibly is, at what has created that and left our people in this place. And whether it's our people or whether it's our environment, and then looking at the lies, you know, those injustices that have taken place is built on broken agreements, on lies, on violence, and it's continuing. And it's actually continuing in a way where it's becoming extreme right now. And it's interesting around the fast tracks, it's just kind of, brings me a bit of humour when I'm like, you know, the government's going to put through this legislation and they'll give these consents or these permits to these developers, and then when they roll in, it's like they're going to see resistance. It's almost irresponsible to give out these permits. You know, when you see our people back home, if there's going to be, you know, trucks rolling down our valley to do mining or going out into the moana to, you know, explore for oil and gas, it's extremely risky business, really, knowing how organised our people are and what people are willing to put on the line to protect their rohe. So it can feel very disheartening, and it can feel, you know, like this all-on attack on us, which it is. But in a way, it's also lighting fires across the motu that they will not be able to control, they will not be able to contain, because our people will rise up and we will respond. And it's quite simple. Any of those developers that come in can expect resistance. You know, we whakapapa to the moana, we whakapapa to the ngāhere, to all of our taonga species, and because of that, that relationship is tapu. So we actually have a responsibility to stand up and to resist against things like, you know, fast-track legislation or consents that are given to developers, and we have every right to do that.
In a democratic society, it's not as if we can literally strong-arm a system, but I think that the way I paint the picture is that we have to be a sort of stone in the gumboot of the system, where they literally cannot get rid of it unless they actually address the stone.
Resistance movements here in Aotearoa are closely tied with other resistance movements all across the globe. So it should be. The struggle and the fight are the same.
In 1978, I wasn't born then, I was merely a twinkle in the eye. My mum went to Cuba and she met with the Palestinian Liberation Front. In that kōrero, they had a big wānanga, and what came out of that wānanga helped to shape and form a book called Māori Sovereignty. That book has contributed to the teachings to many of our well-known heroes that we revere today. Then we look at other examples, such as the example of peaceful resistance that was shown to us by Tohu Kākahi and Te Whiti o Rongomai, and how those methods of resistance were then mimicked by Gandhi in India for the fight against British colonialism, but also how that then subsequently inspired Martin Luther King in the civil rights movements. So I think it's important that we maintain these relationships with other groups because we are learning from them. We know that the Polynesian Panthers came as inspiration from the Black Panther Party by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. And that was essentially about how can we reclaim our identity. And so I think that us being able to borrow, being able to be inspired by other groups actually strengthens our own fight. So it's, in a way, a global wānanga. We wānanga here with 4 people, but those sort of methods are a global wānanga where they're constantly learning from each other, and then we find better ways where we can more effectively fight our own fight. I also just want to add that these movements are addressing the same things, really. When we look at other collective movements, they're addressing settler colonialism. It's talking about the capitalist greed. It's talking about the patriarchy. It's talking about, in some instances, it's looking at Christian evangelism. And there was another thing, white supremacy. If we can wānanga how that looks like in other movements, then we more effectively address those issues.
I think you know who you can call on. Like, even I'm up in the far north, and pai te rongo kia koe koro ana mō Palestine. Engari, taku rōpu e tino, tite roa hanga mahi ko te rōpu kia ora Gaza. They're friends from back in the day when we were living here in Auckland, the Fowler whānau. All those old friends, I still politically trust them today. So, if there's something an important event that happens with the Polynesian Panthers, even though we never made contact for many, many years, we had our 50th anniversary around the same time. We go and tautoko each other. So it's not unusual for some of the Polynesian Panthers to come to some of our events and vice versa, keeping those connections going. I think that the people you always politically trusted, and that, when you called on help, they were just there. So even in like whatever we're doing these days, you can call on different people for different things, or they can call on you.
What is currently happening over in Palestine has been something that has brought a lot of this fight to the forefront of our thinking. Many Māori do not believe that their whawhai has anything to do with us, but the fight is the same.
So my whawhai right now that's sort of very urgent is the whawhai for Palestine. My whawhai doesn't just come out of the blue. It's because of looking into this, the Palestinian cause for the last 19 years when I was studying it at high school. And one of the things that really sort of wells up in me is this real seething hatred of injustice, but also being able to relate that kōrero to what we have experienced as Māori ourselves. It seems as if what we're seeing in real time is an accurate depiction of exactly what we went through our genocide, through ethnic cleansing, through racist policy, through the subjugation of Māori at the hands of the British. And so seeing that and then being reminded of what our tūpuna went through is why I speak out. And while we have the power to offer something very powerful in global Indigenous solidarity, I just imagine what it would have been like if we had smartphones in the 1860s and how beneficial it would have been for us to have global solidarity with other communities, seeing literally what we're going through. I think that that colonial project probably would have ended earlier, or we would have seen a lot more outcomes for Māori because of the outrage that others would have seen. And so I'm outraged because it's not only a reminder of our own brutal past. But I'm also outraged because I don't like what I'm seeing. Those tamariki who are Indigenous to that space look just like my young boys, which is heartbreaking because they should be able to go to kohanga, they should be able to live a full and meaningful life, but that's been taken from them. It's not just in the last 7 months. This is a colonial project that's been lasting for 76 years, and it's hard for us to even fathom what that's like, despite us being victims of colonial violence ourselves.
We know that systems of oppression are at their most violent when they're at the most threat, right?
Yeah.
And we're actually witnessing that right now with what's playing out in Palestine and what has been playing out here in Aotearoa in our own history and currently with what we're facing with a full-on attack against Māori, against the Taiao. So those different movements, those global movements or even movements back here at home, we share that common history of oppression and struggle and injustice. We know who our allies are or who we stand in solidarity with or who we are open to standing with us. And it's extremely important that if we look at that back here at home, you know, and if there's a fast track application, you know, and it's like, oh, that doesn't affect our hapu, that's not in our rohe, that doesn't matter because that rohe is experiencing it. And so we have to show our solidarity, we have to show our support. Even though it doesn't directly affect us, it's a part of the overall attack that's happening on our people. So we need to be able to recognise that.
When Palestine is free, that's not the end goal. The end goal is looking at all of the injustices that are happening all across the world.
Although many of the older generations have had to bear the scars of the abuse inflicted on us for many generations, many have contributed to raising a new generation who are hopefully a little more open to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous ways of thinking.
So I think we also have a lot of allies here. Amazing examples are, you know, like Asians supporting tino rangatiratanga, those young people that are aware of what Te Tiriti is, the importance of it for securing a thriving and healthy environment here in Aotearoa, the importance of it in shifting our economy and providing something that is suitable and appropriate for the distribution of resources and wealth that everyone needs to live a healthy life. And I think more of our young people and our rangatahi with that understanding and without the fear can see that that is actually our future, for a beautiful future, for a flourishing future, for a just future. If we want to be addressing climate change, all these different things. So I think there's huge potential, and the importance of different movements coming together and us knowing who our allies are is because it's extremely important that we are out here, outside of government, outside of the system, building power. And now is our time to build power and to really understand how we do that, who we do that with, not only here in Aotearoa, but with all of those around the world, because this is the issue that we're facing. It's a global issue, and it needs to be addressed with a global response. And we are many.
Nowadays, we have tools that can connect us with each other instantly. Social media. Examples of the power of social media are protests like Mauna Kea, Ihu Mātau and Palestine, where you had masses show up instantly and respond to the call. But what is the role of social media in relation to resistance movements today?
I think social media has been an incredible tool to educate our people. I think that our whakareanga that we're seeing today is highly intelligent, is highly informed, is fearless, is not tied to alliances, and just seeing what we're seeing in terms of their ability to mobilise and be fearless about it, I'm so inspired.
I think you're a really good example of social media, Te Otāne. I think what you are doing on there is really powerful and honest. Like, it's very authentic and just sharing really important messages and engaging people, so many people. I think one of the things that's been interesting through different kaupapa that I've been involved with is the power of social media to activate people, particularly if there's like a protest movement that's actually happening, and the ability for social media to put out alerts to people to turn up in an instant. A little bit different to Hilda's days of distributing pamphlets, but you know, you can literally go live and show people what's happening on the ground and call people in.
I think it's important, people do what they have to do because they believe in it, but I suppose with, you know, the widespread mōhioranga i nei rā mō ngā kaupapa Māori, I think it's important that it keeps spreading, growing, development. There always has to be plans. So the difference is now, you were talking about it before, is that people are using Facebook or whatever you call it, Instagram and Reels to influence others. You know, even when we're asking people to help to give solidarity to Palestine, you actually have to say, here's a few things you can do. So it's not about us leading them. It's actually about everybody feeling that they're participating and that they can do something very simple, whether it's a submission, a talk, a photo on their Blinken whatever page.
The digital space has given individuals a platform and a microphone to assert our data sovereignty into the social media space, because if we're not telling those stories, someone else will, just like how history's shown that Elsden Best actually archived majority of our kōrero tuku iho, and there wasn't that platform for our tūpuna to share that. So we have to own those spaces to tell our stories, to assert our data sovereignty in social media. Yeah, but there's pros and cons.
Today here in Aotearoa, there's a big uprising of Māori. It's going to take time for many of us to understand all of the fights and stances that our tūpuna took. Heck, it's going to take a lot to understand Te Tiriti and he whakaputanga. But what is most awesome about today is that people are actually interested. People are wanting to stand up and be heard. People are starting to understand the injustices.
So right now there's a very active kaki whero group, whatever you want to call them. I don't even want to name them because it's just giving them, but they're organising to undermine all of our so-called treaty gains. They are so dumb. They are so dumb. They're making ministers out of people who know nothing about our history, our makeup, and they say, oh, he Māori tēnei. So what? I don't know how I don't even have much energy anymore to, you know, do stuff. I do little stuff, but I just think our culture is actually going to be the stuff that keeps us strong. You know, me haere tonu te ao Māori, aha ko koe nei nanaki I tēnei wā, me haere tonu, and our culture is going to keep us strong.
It's rejuvenating. It's rejuvenating to be around people who give a shit. And so this is our rally yesterday. I tell everyone, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, because what we're seeing is taking us an emotional toll. And coming together, picked my energy up. And the reason why I talked about tamariki is that there is no greater place that I would want my tamariki to be around than around the people who, for no reason, show up. They show up every single week, rain, hail or sunshine. And I think if we can whakatauira, if we can set that as an example for our tamariki, then we're doing our role as parents as well. Yeah, I like to push the kōrero that we really have to normalise resistance, that we have to just get used to it, because there shouldn't be any stated end goal. Although I do say that the end goal is collective liberation, there's no timeline to when collective liberation will be achieved.
I think even when you achieve what it is you're fighting for, you know, resistance in all kinds of forms is extremely important to any kind of decision making or you know, democracy. You always need movements that are or always will have movements of resistance, you know, even if that's amongst our own people. So in a way, I feel like the movement will always continue. There will always be movements. They'll just be different expressions because of what we would have already achieved.
As long as we have movements, we keep moving. Like, there's never going to be a time where we don't need movements. It's a good sign. It's a sign that we're moving. Unfortunately, sometimes we're consistently repeating ourselves, but it's a good sign that we're moving.
Yeah, the motivation is around a deep sense for justice and for the future that we deserve. And we know what that looks like, right? We know that through all of our kōrero that is, and we know that through our whakapapa. And that's extremely exciting and a huge motivation of the beauty and the flourishing communities and opportunities that our people have waiting ahead of us when we achieve that. And that's the motivation, is that's what we deserve and that's what we're going to have. And now more than ever, we need to mobilize and do a hell of a lot of organizing to make sure that we can achieve it.
Resistance is not going to end. It will continue until such time as injustices are no more, until greed and poverty are no longer an issue, until no one is benefiting off a rule that marginalizes another. Injustices come from greed. Until greed is gone, minorities will continue to fight.